republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to the August meeting of Tampa Streetcar. I appreciate you all being here. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. I'm sure you all have a motion for approval, please.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Any additions, deletions, or corrections? Not hearing any, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Egan, I think we have, anybody in public would like to speak? Okay, hearing no one, let's move to introductions.
Hi, Ruthie Reyes-Burkhart, HART's Chief Operating Officer, has an introduction today.
Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce to the board Mr. Richard Baumann. He's just joined HART this Monday as the Senior Manager of Streetcar Operations. Mr. Baumann comes to us with a very long career in transit, New York City Transit, and recently MARTA. I won't steal his thunder, so I'll allow him to give you a few words of himself.
Good afternoon. I'm not here to really talk about myself. I've also done some private consulting, but that's okay. I intend to make this streetcar a first-class property. Long-time cars out of service are going to be in service. We're going to improve the shop. We're going to have esprit de corps. I'm looking for more operating hours, making do with what we have, and then if we see that we have a capital need or an operating need, we'll come back to you. But right now, we're working.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello. No, we're good. Okay, let's move to the legal and legislative reports. I'll skip our performance report. I'm sorry, Ruthie.
I'll keep it brief as usual. So in the month of July 2015, there were a few late departures with an on-time performance of 99.7%. All 7 late departures occurred on July 29th due to a signal problem at the Css interlock. I'd also like to mention that with all of this inclement weather, we have suffered through a lot of situations with the streetcar line, inclusive of there were times where we had to cease operations from one end of the line and continue to get back in service once the water receded and we started sucking down. There was, in July, no special events, and convention years accounted for less than 1% of overall patronage. That's all for this month.
Good. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Has the situation around Emily Arena changed anything with the construction now? I know it really doesn't affect our tracks, but it certainly affects people's ability to walk.
The construction is still ongoing. We haven't seen or heard from anyone, particularly your customers, letting us know that they have not been able to access our service. So I haven't seen a real direct impact from a verbal perspective or even any emails. We haven't really heard any impact to the customer.
I do know that the new turn, or the turn where they blocked off Channelside Drive there, where they turn from Old Water Street onto Channelside Drive now, that's your drivers are really aware. I saw some guy pull out in front of a driver the other day. I mean, it's really a blind spot if not paying attention to the sign. And oh my goodness, your driver did a heck of a job of averting an accident because that's a real bad spot there. So I'm sure they're all aware of the danger of that spot at this point in time because of the
Other traffic circle?
No, right where they put up the construction fencing where that Old Water Street comes to Channelside, where the track goes right there next to the arena.
Yeah.
It's just it was a fencing and everything, it's a real bad spot.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Let's move to the legal and legislative reports. Mr. Spooker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 items. The first is the transition of THS to the City of Tampa. I'm in communication with Rachel Tukin with the City Attorney's Office. She's going to sign the task of coordinating with us to make sure that the solution transition goes smoothly. We're in the process of setting up a meeting probably next week to start the process going. If you remember, our recommendation was we wanted to time it in such a way that we would really be looking at completion of the transition end of January, or early February, to coincide with the CSX agreement renewal. We're still operating on that assumption, but we'll need 120 days from a legalistic standpoint in order to dot all the i's and cross all the t's with regard to the solution. So we're going to start that process rolling, and looking forward to working with the city staff here there.
Good, thanks.
The other item, anybody have any questions on that? The other item is the advertising contract. We have an existing contract with Direct Media Incorporated. The contract, I think, has had several renewal clauses in it which have been exercised. We exercised the last renewal clause, and therefore we need to consider the negotiation of a new contract. It does not expire until the second week in January 2016, but we want to get it on the radar so that we can time it appropriately. I think probably the best course of action will be to negotiate a renewal of it, and then make sure that it's assignable to the city of Tampa, so that ultimately, when the transition is completed, we simply fill out a piece of paper and assign it to the city. But we'll need to make sure that Direct Media, is comfortable with that assignment occurring. I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. That's my recommendation, is that we start the process. We don't have to do it immediately, but I think we do need to have some discussions with Direct Media, let them know what's going on, and start the process of renewing the contract, assuming that's who the board would want to continue to go with.
Is Steve Rosenstock in the room? You're listening, and you're really the expert on that contract, and I assume that sometime this fall you can come to us with a recommendation about extending the contract or not.
The way the contract is right now, station naming rights is 75-25% split, and other than that, it's 60-40. So they've been doing a really good job still with us on HART, and Lori's been working very hard, and she's been bringing in, she was bringing in a lot of money. So I don't know, and again, I won't know that they would be open to changing the terms, but I would recommend at least one more year, and then because of what's happening with the change. But I'm pretty sure they would be amenable to that.
Okay, well, good, then we'll be sure to revisit it next month.
And the last item is the Css Insurance renewal. I think this showed up under legal and legislative reports, probably because I couldn't figure out where else to put it. But we do need to start the process of considering how we're going to be handling the Css Insurance now, because it's a fairly extensive process. We have to deal with multiple carriers, and it's a fairly complicated, structured insurance program. So, my recommendation is we need to get that on the radar now, so that, under a worst-case scenario, we're prepared in the event that the transition has not been completed by February 9th, 2016, to have a renewal policy in place. Again, as with the advertising contract, I think we need to approach the carriers about ensuring one of two things: either that the city can be an alternative principal insured party under that policy, or alternatively that they're agreeable to the policy being assigned. Now, it could be that a new arrangement will be negotiated with a different carrier, in the interim, but I'm looking at it from, the theory of hope for the best and plan for the worst. So the worst case scenario is we're going to have a policy in place in February 2016. So I think it's probably appropriate to get that out on the radar and start having some discussions with the carrier about it.
Bob, do you have any thoughts about that? I heard you mention something about CSX at one of the hearings. Are you expecting us to move forward with our current consultant and try and renegotiate that contract? And it appears as if we may be able to save our money this year.
I need to talk to the city's insurance department just to
I need to talk to Css Insurance Department just to make sure that there's no issues with that, just because of procurement issues and the bottom line, they're saying that someone's an agent of record, so let me do that, and I'll be prepared to speak, once I propose.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think Grant is here, and typically this is about the time that we would start. I think he can try to speak for a little bit, but we really would need the city's comfort level to be there to start.
Well, again, you know, if it's performed during the auspices of the existing board, and then it's done as an assignment, I don't see that there's an issue with that.
Okay.
That would be the cleanest way to go, as long as the carriers are agreeable.
Well, we'll need to do that, yeah. Well, I think we're probably already additionally insured on the policy, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, board. How are we doing today? A few things, I guess, to kind of answer that question. You know, let's not, don't intermingle additional insured and named insured, because they're really two separate things. In some ways, they're really not the same whatsoever. From my standpoint, as I've been talking with the appropriate parties, is that number one, and really to move forward, is we're going to need clear and concise directive, and this is really going to have to come from the city's part, pertaining to how we do approach this. As Mr. Smoker said, this isn't just a very clear and easy transition that, hey, we wrap down THS and then we hand over the policies to somewhere else. Per the policy language, there's wording of which the carriers must agree. We must write a formal letter to have the carriers accept an assignment, and I think we're going to have some pretty big problems if we do that. The reason why is that you have to realize the carriers are underwriting THS and the other parties involved, of which would be HART and CSX, or HART, CSX, in the city of Tampa. And now if you say, okay, we're going to dissolve this entity, and now we just want you to underwrite the city of Tampa, well, now that's kind of a bigger problem. They need to peel back the onion a little bit more and look more into details. I think the biggest thing I want everyone to realize here is we have to be clear, we have to be methodical, we have to be concise, and we can't just go ahead and say, okay, we're turning this over, here are your policies. It's much more detailed, it's much more complex than that. We also have to consider if THS is fully dissolved, there's something going to be needed called tail coverage, or extended reporting period coverage, which is going to fill in those gaps for any claims that have already been incurred but not reported. So again, it's a complex scenario. We do need to stay way ahead of this, and it's in THS's and the city's best interest that all this kind of work together to make sure the transition is smooth from the insurance aspect.
So I would think that if Bob is talking to the city risk management at some point, that might result in a meeting to really kind of sort this out. It's really important that we get into it. You know, I have another question for you, and I've been meaning to ask somebody. In the newspaper coverage about the DOT funding extension study and the city putting some money in it too, it also mentioned CSX had made a commitment to help to address the crossing issue. Is that real, or is that just? It was in the paper.
That means it's true.
Yeah, once again disappointed by reality. So they haven't really made any serious effort to deal with the problem at this point. My guess is that that's going to be part of the extension study conversation about how you cross it twice or 3 times. Okay, so what direction can we get right?
What I would recommend doing, and it would be really easy and convenient for all parties, is I want to bring in my 2 railroad experts, Brian from California, who some of you have listened to, and I've also gone a step further. I want to bring in the lead underwriter from our carrier, and where I think both of them together, so these guys are the foremost experts in the United States. This is all they do is rail, and I think it would be beneficial to THS. It'd be especially beneficial to the city to sit down and talk with everyone, talk with these guys, Again, the overriding factor is that we need some kind of definitive movement from the city in order for us how to proceed.
Yeah.
The results, if this is just kind of not done in the appropriate manner, could be some serious negative repercussions for everyone, of which we don't want that.
Right. So Bob, the city, the key person is the city's risk manager? And who is that?
Actually, there's a temporary person in there right now. So I would engage the city CFO as well as this man.
Okay.
I'll reach out to him.
I appreciate it. And then you're working out a date with Catherine to bring these people in. So let's pick the date well enough in advance so that while we're here, I know we're going to need to meet with the city as well as HART and then talk to the board. Okay?
So any other questions on the answer to the board?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always going to ask insurance questions.
Excellent.
Being an architect, I'm all too familiar with tail coverage, unfortunately. I understand from a professional liability standpoint. Are you talking just from a liability standpoint, that the necessity for tail coverage, even if we're just switching over with the city? I'm kind of confused on that. Could you just explain, because you know that the manner of your presentation today is somewhat of, I'm very concerned that you're coming to us and saying you got big problems. And I want to understand why you think we have big problems, and then you start throwing, the word tail coverage out there, then, yeah, I see we're going to have some issues that we're going to have to address, and I want to make sure that going into this, that those issues are fully vetted, so we understand what we're getting ourselves into, or what the potential is from the insurance side of this, because that could be, from a financial standpoint, it could be something that would impact certainly budgets and decisions, so just curious.
Sure. I don't want to get too complicated. Let me drill it down in a very basic manner. So you have your entity that could be dissolved, THS. So let's just go ahead and say that they wind down and they no longer exist. But let's just say a week or a month, or it could even happen 2 days ago. An incurred but not reported claim happened. So therefore, it's a claim that could pop up after the entity is dissolved. And tail coverage will go ahead and extend the current policies in force, of which when that claim happened, and it would pick that up and it would wrap it back into THS's program, rather than potentially jumping onto a different program of which coverage may not exist to begin with. So its most simplest point is all I'd consider it is kind of an umbrella to make sure that claim would be contained in these set of policies if something were to happen or occur after THS is dissolved. Is that kind of? And the reason for that is all real liability policies are on a claims-made form, not an occurrence form, which is a big distinguish between both. And that's why when you have tails and ERP coverage, that's when that kind of comes into place. And let me just say one thing too, Mickey. In no means am I here trying to scare everyone. I'm not trying to say that. Or I'm not trying to do that. I want us to be prepared, that we have everything properly in place, because it's in everyone's best interest. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next month.
Mr. Chairman, that would conclude my report.
Thank you so much. I don't really have a report. We, Abby and I and Mickey and Catherine and Bob and Ben have all been variously attending CRA meetings and YCDC meetings, and there's one tonight at 5:30, and that's the last one before the public hearing later in the month, next week. No, actually, you're not going, so.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, people are disappointed there's not more money in the budget, but nobody's kicking very hard, and so Catherine, I think, resolved, maybe we'll hear about this in her report, to improve more out of what we've got. And there's the Streetcar Extension coming up in the next city's next fiscal year, and so everybody's excited about that, so I don't know what else to tell you, it's the dog days of summer. So let's move to the executive director's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. We, at the HART side, have been doing presentations around the county on our transit development plan, it's our long-range plan. We are working on a plan that talks about how HART will spend the funding we know we're getting, and how HART would spend the money that would come from the Go Hillsborough initiative. People ask a lot of questions about Streetcar, so there's an awful lot of interest in the community when we get out there. We do the HART presentation, and the follow-up questions almost all about Streetcar, so we're just seeing an awful lot of interest. Jeff will give you more detail in the proposed budget in a few minutes. We had previously come to you with a budget that had moved Mr. Baumann back over into the THS budget, but we had left the $100,000 saved from CSX as a proposed, I don't want to say slush fund, but a bucket that we can be out there after every event hit the Alamo Arena and be a little easier to market. We, in previous years, have been able to present with the city and then come back and be flexible. In this year's presentation, we presented, we aren't as flexible in moving stuff around. So Jeff is going to show you the budget where the personnel costs for Mr. Baumann are back in the HART budget, and that frees up this $100,000 being earmarked for service anyhow. So we will be able to make good on that commitment that we have this bucket to get into. And we'll continue to work closely with the city on what that looks like. And Mr. Bauman's been here a whole 2.5 days. We probably, I think, worked 6 days worth. So I will be very patient. We haven't touched the schedules, I don't want to say since the White House extension opened, so we have an awful lot of data of what that travel time really looks like. And I'm very interested in his observations of what that looks like as we're coming into the cooler weather and the stronger ridership. We may have some opportunities to tweak how things are scheduled and get a little more service out there, either earlier or more frequent. I don't know what that looks like. I know if we don't look at it, the answer is we will get the same thing. So let us take a scrub on that and come back to you with some ideas. And with that, I will conclude my report.
Great. Lori Davis, report.
Yes, I am not Lori Davis again. I spoke to Lori yesterday, and she was going to be here today, so I did not get an update from her for the first time. So I hope she's out, and I will double check that she's out writing business at this moment. So I don't have an update right now.
Okay, I'll look forward next month. Thank you so much. Okay, we are now at the point of a presentation from Mr. Stewart on the annual HART operating budget and THS corporate budget.
Good afternoon. Jeff Stewart, Chief Financial Officer for HART. Today is the final discussion on HART Streetcar operating budget as well as the THS corporate budget. The numbers that you see before you are relatively unchanged since May when we first presented the tentative budget to you. The city has since accepted the proposed budget and has presented that as part of their annual preparation for FY16. So what you see before you today is exactly what the city has and what we are moving forward with the HART board. The annual operating budget, again, is $1.97004 million. This represents 12,575 revenue hours for next year. Estimated ridership is 306,000. We did adjust our ridership up, yes, up for FY16. We have been seeing ridership above and beyond what we thought we would be seeing for FY15. So we're going to continue hopefully with that trend. As the biggest differences that you'll see as we move into next year, building on what Ms. Egan presented to you, is indeed that $100,000 that is available for innovative service solutions that you may want to come up with during the next year. The way that we have it set right now, that funding, moving that position back into HART through budgetary means, nothing formal has to be done for that action, avails that $100,000 to you throughout the next year. So that is not represented within a line item in this budget that you're seeing today, outside of a line item for a salary which we are going to absorb. So an additional $100,000 for innovative service. So the THS, pursuant to the operating and tri-party agreement, we are responsible for a HART operating budget, which resides in the component of HART's total operating budget for all modes and the THS corporate budget. So the HART streetcar operations budget for this year being proposed to the HART board is $1.577129 million. That includes the contributions from THS, no funding from fund balance of any of the organizations. Includes salary and benefit increase, and again, that salary and benefit increase is having that position in the THS budget to pay for, but now we're pulling it back out, so that swing of $100K, again, is available for your use for innovative service. THS corporate budget, you do see the cost savings from the Css Insurance line. That is something that we've very much been looking forward to seeing over the past couple of years as we prepare these budgets. Special service districts, unchanged since May. Port Authority, again, we will eventually, another fiscal year, and we will drop that off the history and will not be a line anymore unless funding comes forward. It will be historical, but not continuously proposed every year. Other revenues, if there were any, and that's the contribution from the city of Tampa. These are our billing rates for this year based on the budget of $1.97 million. Board expenses, relatively unchanged, and they are completely unchanged from 2015. Key operating stats, again, our revenue hours are looking at increasing next year. Ridership is moving from 292 to 306,000 riders. And our positions, the first line item, which is actually mistitled, it should be Senior Manager of Streetcar Operations. As you notice in 15, HART paid for that position outright, fully loaded. We inserted it this year again. We're taking it back out after this budget, but it does not require any action or formal board resolution to do so. The funding will stay intact, the position will move. Just as a recap of exactly what this budget pays for as far as service, again, it's three streetcars operating 20-minute frequencies, 30-minute frequencies Friday through Saturday, 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., annual miles of 67,532, and annual trips of 26,074, plus all maintenance of the vehicles, the cleaning of the streetcars and the stations, major systems maintained from the traction motors, ADA compliance, and all other systems. So, again, the budget relatively unchanged from May, with the exception of the $100,000. And again, we're moving forward with 2 action items to approve both the HART streetcar operating budget and the THS corporate budget.
Jeff, why did the cost per service hour go up so much from this current year?
The cost of
Cost per service hour, almost $8.
last year's budget, it's based on overall, last year was 1.959 million, this year is 1.970 million. So it's a small increase.
It doesn't account for $8 an
We'll
hour.
check the math.
Yeah.
We'll check the math.
That's a lot, right?
We'll check.
Questions, anybody? Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more detail in your projection for ridership going up so substantially? I mean, that's a good thing, but what are you basing it on that? Is that just based on what we're seeing now?
Yes, what
Projections,
we're seeing now,
activity?
and the success of the German cruise ships that we saw this year, hoping to continue that into next year as well. It's really based on what we're seeing. Service planning feels very confident based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, that we will see this increase going into 2016 as well.
One of the things we've noticed, we've talked a little in the CRA meetings, is we get a disproportionate increase when we're running circuit for these special events, given that the expansion we've come to bring in the budget is exclusively focused on the special events. We would expect to see disproportionate disproportionately high return. Hope I'm not sitting here in January telling you that we were wrong. But again, what we've seen is when we get that extra service out at night, we just see much stronger return of that than we do throughout the base of our service.
Yeah, please check out the bill rates. Chart doesn't make perfect sense to me, but there's probably a reason why they go up and down, up and down. Okay, so what you want from us is a recommendation to approve budget as presented.
Next.
Well, that's next. This was the presentation, now we have resolutions.
Recommendation to approve resolution 2015-0803, approval of proposed FY 2016 HART annual operations budget in the amount of $1,577,129.
Now technically, this budget has to be approved, doesn't really have to be approved until after the city council and HART board approve, is that correct?
The HART operating budget is actually part of the HART full operating budget, which is being approved on September 24th and September 28th, respectively, during public hearings. So the budget that gets approved today will go to the city of Tampa for their public hearings in September, as well as the HART board hearings in September.
Okay.
You are correct. The way that we are technically structured is that the city approves and HART approves and comes back for final approval to THS. In previous years, that's given us a situation where this serves as a default approval. It goes up to the other two entities. And then because of the HART cycle, it doesn't come back to THS until the fiscal year is already done.
Right.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with having us approve it, I just want you to really look at these service hours because they don't make sense. Anything else?
You know, just a comment that, again, $450,000 of funding is available for approval of CRS and this as well.
Right, well, that's a good point too. So this, in a sense, this is a tentative approval. This is a tentative. Hmm? Yeah.
You are approving today a proposed budget. You're not approving a finalized budget.
Okay.
I move to approve the proposed budget as presented.
Second.
There's a motion and a second, any other discussion?
Yeah, just a clarification, if I could, the dates that you mentioned of those public hearings, you said 24th and 28th.
14th.
I have 14th, thank you for, it's sweating.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any additional comments? None, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion is approved. Second.
Resolution R 2015-08-04, approval of proposed FY 2016 Tampa Historic Streetcar Incorporated THS annual corporate budget in the amount of $743,814.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
We
Second.
have a motion and a second. Any questions? Thank you. If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Say nay. Motion approved. Thank you very much. We'll probably see this again in maybe September meeting or October. Thank you very much. Okay, we do have financial statements, marketing report, leadership, and service reports, all of which are in your package. Does anybody have any questions about them? Is there any old business? Any new business? No, that's what we